The Necessity and Beauty of Violence by Filippo Tommaso Marinetti. Now, F.T. Marinetti was the figurehead of the Futurist movement, which was an artistic, philosophical / political movement that was around at the time of the new Renaissance that was forming in Italy with people like Gabriele D'Annunzio, Niccolo Bombazzi, Benito Mussolini, Julius Evola, and so on. During this creative time, the Futurists made themselves known. So let's get into the necessity and beauty of violence. First of all, I shall be talking to you about our new futurist ethic, the ethics of danger, of courage, and day-to-day heroism, and about our only obdurate antagonists, mediocrity and cowardice. This change in topic arises naturally out of a clear need to explain, above all else, the passion that courses through our veins, and those ideals which, more than any others, illuminate our minds. I shall then demonstrate how, from a clear love of danger, from habitual courage, and from everyday heroism, spring precisely and naturally an urgent need for and recognition of the beauty of violence. All of this is entirely free of any political agenda, something you'll not be very used to. I am revealing my thoughts to you in this very straightforward manner, so that in them you will easily recognize a proposal for action or merely look upon them as something entertaining. I am well aware of the reservations you have built up against us futurists, as a result of the more or less amusing gossip of mercenary newspapers, those emasculated custodians of Italian mediocrity and enemies of any sort of novelty. And it may well be that you don't yet have any clear notion of what we are and what we stand for. Just imagine, in the doleful, stagnating republic of letters and arts, a group of young men who are utterly rebellious and destructive, who are fed up with adoring the past, sick of academic pedantry, bursting with a desire for fearless originality, and positively gasping for a life that is free, full of adventure, vitality, and habitual heroism, and who want to liberate the Italian spirit from that heap of prejudices, banalities, deference, and veneration that we call traditionalism. In short, we futurists are a group of anarchists operating in the field of art. As artists and poets, I shall therefore abstain from giving you any advice on political matters, or on how to best defend your economic interests. I shall dangle a few general concepts before your eyes, and then some fiery sentiments that blaze more fiercely and more devastating than any onslaught by Garibaldian red shirts. In our Futurist Manifesto, we extol the whole gamut of patriotism, war, the soul cleanser of the world, the destructive acts of the anarchist, and the beautiful ideas that are worth dying for, gloriously contrasted with the vile ideas people currently live for. Certainly these principles and these words have never, until now, had any contact with each other. You have been accustomed to thinking of patriotism and war as being totally opposed to anarchism, which caused so many lives to erupt in the struggle for greater freedom. Without getting bogged down in lengthy and tedious discussion of a more or less philosophical nature, let us simply acknowledge that the seemingly contradictory ideas, the collective and the individual, are in reality very closely related. For does not the development of the collective depend on the exertions and initiatives of individuals? And what's more, the prosperity of a nation has its origins in hostility toward, yet imitation of, the multiple elements of which it is composed. In just the same way, the industrial and military rival that arises between nations is an essential factor in the progress of mankind. A strong nation can contain, at one and the same time, masses of people intoxicated by patriotic enthusiasm and reactionaries who are panic-stricken at any sign of revolt. Here we see two quite different directions for the very same instinctive courage, strength, and energy. Do not the destructive acts of the anarchist perhaps represent an absurd yet beautiful hankering after the ideal of a justice that can never be realized? Are they not perhaps a barrier erected to oppose the evasive arrogance of the dominant victorious classes? Speaking personally, I much prefer the bomb of the valiant to the cringing attitude of the bourgeoisie who hides away in a moment of danger, or to the loathsome selfishness of the peasant who deliberately maims himself rather than serve his country. As for our glorification of war, which we shall never tire of repeating, it does not constitute a contradiction of our ideals, as some people think, nor does it point to regression to a barbaric age. Our position is that the vital questions of physical and moral well-being ought, of necessity, to be resolved precisely by having recourse to war in preference to all other solutions. Is not the life of the nation rather like that of the individual who fights against infection and high blood pressure by means of the shower and of bloodletting? In the same way, nations, in our view, have to observe a constant, healthy regime of heroism and indulge themselves in glorious bloodbaths. And the consequences, you will tell me? We know them well enough. We know that a period of misery inevitably follows a war, whatever its outcome. Yet, it is quite a short period when a war has been won, and not as long as you might think when it has been lost. True enough, but don't we have such periods of misery, and without any glorifying light, as a result of a simple crisis in the stock market or the dirty game of stock jobbing? Off with you! Away with this sort of self-interest! Will you then accept no other ideals than those of your own comfort and quiet life? And furthermore, just remember that the logical and necessary purpose of great armies on the land and on sea is war. It is better therefore to embrace it as a soldier than endure it like a sheep. We, on the other hand, promote and support the dual preparation for war and revolution, under the auspices of a more intense patriotism in the divine name of Italy, blazoned across our skies in the fiery vapors of a revitalized Italian courage. We believe that only an aesthetic of blood and an ethic of danger and heroism can purify and regenerate our nation. From the moment we realized we owe the fearful state of corruption, opportunism, and easygoing commercial cynicism into which the Italian parliamentary system has gradually sunk to several generations of politicians. We poets and artists have been the only ones that keep alive the flame of an absolute selflessness in the blinding light of an ideal of unattainable beauty. Have we not, therefore, we who only write verse or paint pictures, without any hope of adequate remuneration, have we not perhaps the right to teach selflessness? Are we not allowed, then, to chase the merchants from the temple, and to offer our strengths and our hearts to Italy in the name of art? Do you think maybe we are incapable of practical politics because of our excessive imagination? Certainly, regardless of all our artistic shortcomings, we shall do no worse than our predecessors. And besides, we believe that history awaits us. Undoubtedly, You will have observed that in the unfolding of human events, a period of idealistic, self-sacrificing violence is inevitably followed by one of self-centered, avarice, mercantilism, such as that in which we now find ourselves. Now we wish to revive the bold, passionate endeavor of the race that knew how to bring about Italian independence. And we shall do it without the exciting stimuli of unfurling flags and military bands. We poets and artists, without having recourse to new political systems, and spreading only the fire of an inextinguishable enthusiasm throughout this Italy that is plagued with skeptics and cynics, by simply electrifying this vile and deluded Italy. Would it really seem absurd to you if one day our parliament were to embrace 500 artists instead of the usual 500 profiteers? You will tell me, in obedience to the teachings of our great George Sorel, that nothing is more harmful to the interests of the revolutionary proletariat than intellectuals. And you'll be right, for in this present day, intellectualism and culture are synonymous with egotistical ambition and a backward-looking obscurantism. But we artists are not intellectuals of that sort. Above all else, we are fast-beating hearts, bundles of electrified nerves, instinctive beings who are ruled only by a divine, intoxicating intuition, and we believe ourselves to be, or indeed are, all ablaze with the proverbial sacred flame. Without stopping, we have passed through the catacombs of the pedantic erudition. We know enough to walk without stumbling, and we won't stumble. We wouldn't even if we were less cultured, for we have the sure instincts of youth. We wish to snatch violently away from the old, the dying, and the dead all the rights and authority, and instead grant these to youth. Futurism therefore proclaims that the necessary intervention of artists in public affairs so as to turn government into a selfless art. At last, in place of what it is now, robbery become pedantic science. But I can already hear you mumbling about our technical inexperience. What of it? Away with you! Don't forget that the Italian race is only capable of producing great artists and great poets, whom it should not be entirely impossible to instruct quickly after a few months' observation of parliamentary mechanisms. I believe that parliamentarism, which was devised to give the majority a say in the running of the country, is destined to perish if artists are not permitted to replace the lawyer class, which, until now, has had a monopoly of all the seats, demonstrating beyond all measure their sole function, that of selling and skillfully exploiting their knowledge and their words. Therefore, it is essentially from these habitual practices of the lawyers that we wish to liberate Italian political life. And it is for this reason that we vigorously oppose the people's lawyer, and generally every sort of intermediary such as brokers and middlemen, all the great cooks of universal happiness, and most particularly those who wish to slow down with every means at their disposal the advent of a glorious future, especially the enemies of all violence, the ignoble masters of low diplomacy, whom we deem harmful to, and obstacles in the way of the rise of the human spirit in its conquest of a greater freedom. Their presence has by now become ridiculous, laughable, in the midst of this violent, inflexible life of ours, which is intoxicated, frenzied ambition, and over which there towers the new terrible god, danger. This is what we want for every single Italian. If we are to revive and defend the worn-out idea of freedom and rekindle the faded notion of justice, we need, above all else, to have a proud and strong sense of our own identity. To have a sense of our own identity means, for us, being proud of being Italian. This we desire with all our heart. We are independent, patriotic Italians, steadfast in our courage, thirsting for the freedom and heroism to make war or revolution, and not to be a flock of starving sheep.